Hi folks, I'm John James and I'm passionate about extension. I'm the Director of Enablers of Change and I'm based in Hobart.
And I'm Ruth Nettle. I'm from the University of Melbourne. I lead the Rural Innovation Research Group and we're involved with research on extension as well as extension education.
Today we're talking about the future of extension. So let's start by clarifying what extension is. I like to use the Australian definition that was developed back in 2006. It defines extension as the process of enabling change in individuals, communities and industries involved with agriculture and natural resource management. I particularly like the word enabling, as it's not about managing or forcing change to happen, it's about facilitating it, a bit like a catalyst in a chemical reaction. Extension is a dynamic discipline, and it's important to note that the approaches have evolved over time. This expanding bubble diagram illustrates some of these changes over the last 50 years. So while we started with the tipping in approach of technology transfer back in the 60s, we've added other approaches over time. These days, it's often more appropriate to use topping up approaches such as co-innovation and co-design. While it's tempting to only use the latest approach, all of them should be considered and the triggers to use the right one in the right situation. That depends on the situation and whether it's a simple problem or a complex one involving multiple stakeholders. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with this diagram from your New Zealand publication, Over the Fence. So that's a quick snapshot of what extension is and the diversity of approaches used in the past. Ruth, where do you think extension is headed in the future?
Well, it's a really good point, John, the future of extension. I think it's all about disruption. Disruption for our clients or the people that we work with, and disruption for us working in extension. So for the people that we're working with, it's a harder, tougher and riskier ride and environment for them. There's also different clients or people that we work with, whether that's the type of business that they're operating or their gender or their cultural diversity. So we've got different people that we're working with. And I think importantly, we've also got lots more players or other actors, as I like to say, in the mix, working with the people that we're working with. So we seem to be disconnected from them. And I wonder how they're perceiving us. Are we the old guard standing in the way of the new? So I'm sure the perceptions on both sides are largely wrong, but it's part of the disruption. And so for us then, are we helping reduce uncertainty and the anxiety that can come with that in this disrupted world? Are we part of the enabling environment to really help people through this disruption? So are we building trust? Are we building the evidence of our impact? So John, this is why I think the future of extension is disruption. Do you think so too?
Yes, I do, Ruth. And it's very sobering, isn't it? And if that's what the future looks like, how can we best respond as extension practitioners?
Well, John, firstly, I think it's about the stance that we take. And by that, I mean, are we leaning in, which is the buzzword, or standing back and waiting for change to happen to us? So what I mean by leaning in is, are we being, proactive in demonstrating our leadership and working with communities amongst this disruption? So this also means, are we coordinating and networking, not only amongst the people that we know or the people we're familiar with, but are we helping connect people in the networks? Are we really working with the new players, or are we going to stand back and wait to be swamped or overrun by them? I think we have to be inquisitive about the change and about the disruption. I think we really have to be checking in with our communities and these new players and really think about what we all need to do differently. So to me, that's about leaning in. It's about having a mirror up to what we're currently doing and the way we're currently doing things. We need to get out of our comfort zone, even though it's pretty comfortable, and to really address this issue of there being so many more new players. So a question that we can ask ourselves is whether or not in the last week we've gone out of our way to meet one of these new players, for instance, and find out about their role, find out about what they're doing, and look at ways that we can work together through the disruption. So, John, that's one of the first things I think we need to do, which is lean in, be engaged. What do you think?
Oh, that all sounds really good, Ruth. And I like the word inquisitive, that we should be more inquisitive. And I certainly agree about the need to be proactive and help lead the change. I'd also like to add that I'm seeing an increasing importance of the way we do our work. We sometimes talk about engaging the disengaged farmers, which, labels them and implies it's their fault. Instead, we need to look at ourselves and the way we're undertaking our work. What choices have we made that could make it difficult for farmers to engage with us? Is it the timing of the events? Where should we be avoiding school drop-off and pick-up times? Are we not hitting the mark with the topics we're offering? Or perhaps we're failing to correctly identify the barriers and benefits associated with a particular behaviour change that we're targeting. This is where I like the community-based social marketing approach. It forces us to take the time and research the actual barriers and benefits by running focus groups and the like, and not to just assume that we know what they are. We need to take the time to talk with the farmers and, where possible, involve them in the design and delivery of the activities. That's where I like the co-innovation and co-design approaches, as they acknowledge the inherent wisdom and creativity that many farmers bring with them. Working more closely with the farmers also helps build trust and relationships. These are so important to the ways that we work. I'm involved in a project at the moment to develop a shared practice framework for extension, where we've engaged some specialists from the health sector. They've been using practice frameworks to guide their profession for many years, and we're now developing one for extension. What's interesting is that effective engagement and strong relationships are central to that model, yet it's not something we often talk about in extension. I conducted a survey just in 2018 with about 150 extension practitioners across a range of industries in Queensland, and amongst other things, I asked what was working well for them in achieving practice change with farmers. The standout response, with over double the mentions of the next item, was one-on-one extension. I suspect we often put too much emphasis on group activities as they're seen as more efficient. And hey, who doesn't like to report that we had over 100 farmers come to one of our events? However, for effectiveness, it's the good old one-on-one interactions where behaviour change occurs. Of course, the other items are also important as they're part of the wider system, but let's not underestimate the power of our one-on-one interactions.
Yeah, John, I think this is, leads to what I think is the second important thing, I suppose, for extension to focus on in the future. And that's really about needing to work more strongly with others. And I think that also means shared attribution versus competition, and really trying to search for the win-win for all the different players that have a role in supporting change. So it's, I call it recognising that nobody has a monopoly on change. So it is the ecosystem that creates the change, and part of that means that the future of extension is about calibrating where we fit relative to the people, other people in the system and with the people we work with. and for. So this is really important in the Australian context, and I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand. And so I've got this graph here from some research we did where we asked 1,000 farmers in Australia who they sourced their information and advice and support from in terms of the types of organisations and types of advisors. And you can see here that the product resellers or input providers, the research and development corporations, the farmer-owned and run groups, government, the independent advisors, the processing companies and the not-for-profit or community organisations were all involved with change. Farmers noted that they drew from all of these organisations for support to their farm management. Now, they also had a main source, but you can see by the blue colour there that anybody could be a main source. So this idea that we don't have a monopoly on change, and actually by working more together with others, we can achieve more and reach more. So I think this is about building networks and not just using them. We do achieve more together. So I think this is an important second point for the future of extension, John. Do you think so?
Oh, absolutely, Ruth. And we do need to think about how we approach change ourselves. So, it was Albert Einstein who was quoted as saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. As good extension practitioners, we need to be good scientists and trial and test new ways of doing things. We need to gather data and make informed decisions. This could be as easy as doing some A/B split testing with the emails we send out. Software such as MailChimp allows us to test 2 different headlines and see which one leads to greater open rates or clicks on links that are embedded in the emails. I love asking questions, and I find e-surveys a great way to do that easily. In that same survey I mentioned earlier, I asked the question, how do you think extension will look in 10 years' time? Here's a summary of the responses, and you'll see that while they thought we'd continue to use the traditional extension approaches, they predicted even greater use of technology, and in particular, web-based technologies. This survey was conducted towards the end of 2018, so imagine if they knew then what we know now after coronavirus. Personally, while I've been horrified to see the negative impacts of the pandemic on individuals, families, and businesses, I've been delighted to see how quickly our extension colleagues have adapted to the new way of working with physical distancing at the forefront of our minds. Just look how quickly our MPP have pivoted and are providing this e-forum of a way of still getting together and sharing information and ideas. And of course, we're still meeting face-to-face. We're just not physically meeting together. Finally, as extension professionals, we need to keep being agile and testing what we're doing so we can find new ways to be even more effective. I love reading books, and as I reflect back over the ones I've read in recent years, there are 2 that stand out as being relevant to today's topic. The first one is Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. The authors use a metaphor of an elephant, its rider, and the path. They talk about the need to motivate the elephant into action, point the rider in the right direction, and shape the path so that it's easy to follow. It's an easy to read book, which I highly recommend for anyone who's interested in change. It was a forerunner for what we now describe as behavioural science. The other one is Randomistas by Andrew Leigh, an Australian politician who just happens to have a PhD in economics. In his book, he talks all about randomised controlled trials, or RCTs, with a particular focus on how they can be used in the social sciences. He includes some examples of how he personally has applied the results from RCTs, such as how he wears compression socks during marathon races to speed his recovery, because that's what the results showed, and that he rips off band-aids off the skinned knees of his kids extra quickly because a randomised controlled trial found that the fast rip was less painful than the slow peel. While many of us may know that instinctively, it's good to have it backed up by data. So folks, let's put on our white lab coats and see what is actually working with the different approaches we're using, and be open to new ideas and approaches. Ruth, an integral part of this is being able to measure the impact that we make. What thoughts do you have about this?
Yes, John, this is definitely the third area to leave people with around the future of extension and dealing with disruption. I think we do need to focus more on the evidence of our impact, but I point back, that's not just of ourselves individually, but also the collective impact and the idea of sharing attribution. But I think it's also important that we show how we've achieved the impact, which links to your idea of being the scientist in this. So it's not just about ticking the evaluation boxes or the vibe of learning groups. It's to really step out and outline our theory of action in supporting change and the evidence for that change and how it was created. So this is the theory along with the practice and the research alongside what we do. So I think we do need to be doing more experimenting, definitely.
So as we wind up this presentation, let's do a quick recap. The future is more disruption for our communities and for extension as well. In response, we'll need to be proactive. So let's not stand back waiting for it to hit us, but instead help facilitate the change. Secondly, let's work with others better and more, and let's share the attribution and keep experimenting. And finally, we need to describe our shared impacts and the change process involved. Thanks for watching this short presentation, and I'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas during the eForum.
Yes, John, it's going to be great talking to our Kiwi cousins more about this issue of disruption.